This is Bilal. I'm Senior Program Manager at Hans Seidel Foundation, Pakistan, and I welcome you all to this webinar by Hans Seidel Foundation's Young South Asia Network on Urban Sustainability. We have an impressive lineup of keynote speakers and expert panelists from all over South Asia, and who will discuss and enlighten us about the various urban and environmental challenges in the region, particularly from a governance perspective, and how a network like Young South Asia Network can contribute to finding their sustainable solutions. And later in the event, selected YSAN fellows will also present case studies on major urban governance challenges and best practices from their respective cities. So first of all, I would like to welcome Mr. Andreas Hergenröther, resident representative of Hans Seidel Foundation, Pakistan, to formally open the event with his remarks. Mr. Hergenröther has more than 25 years of experience in political advocacy and foreign trade promotion in Asia, the Middle East, North Africa, and Europe. And as the former chief delegate of German industry and commerce in Sri Lanka and CEO of various German chamber offices in countries such as Saudi Arabia, Taiwan, Egypt, and Algeria, he has initiated and mediated dialogues between high-ranking decision makers of business and politics at regional and international level. So the floor is yours, Mr.
Yeah, thank you very much, dear fellows of the Young South Asia Network, distinguished speakers and guests. As the new resident representative of the Hans Seidel Foundation in Pakistan, I wish you a very warm welcome from Munich to our webinar on responsive urban local governance in South Asia. I'm very impressed to see so many national and regional experts, as well as alumni of the Hans Seidel Foundation's Young South Asia Network. Sustainable urbanization has been a growing concern across the globe. In 2015, the United Nations adopted the Sustainable Development Goals by setting up the Agenda 2030. Goal 11 of the agenda targets sustainable cities and communities, and currently more than half of the world's populations live in cities. By 2050, 2/3 of the humanity, about 6.5 billion people, will be urban. Sustainable development cannot be achieved without significantly transforming the way we build and manage our urban spaces. The South Asian region is home to some of the fastest growing cities in the world, facing continuous challenges of natural disasters such as flooding, rising energy prices, and increasing urban heat. And simply, and I think that's the most important challenge, to provide livable, affordable living and working conditions to the citizens. Continuously growing volumes of domestic and industrial waste, water scarcity, and the growing pressure of civil society groups have increased the demand for sustainable urbanization solutions. The need for responsive urban local governance has never been more urgent than it is today. Municipalities, urbanization-related governmental authorities, planners and architects, as well as civil society groups, need to be strengthened through focused knowledge transfer. It is only through effective collaboration and knowledge sharing that we can address these challenges and work towards building sustainable and resilient urban communities in South Asia. Considering this, HSF established the Young South Asia Network in 2022 to bring together multipliers and future leaders from all over South Asia by equipping them with the exposure, connections, and knowledge needed to address questions of urban sustainability. Since then, these young leaders from diverse fields have been connected with each other and their counterparts from Germany and Europe, and have engaged in a sustainable and meaningful dialogue on common challenges. The Hans Seidel Foundation is a German political foundation entirely funded by the German government. Based in Munich, Hans Seidel Foundation is active worldwide with its 60 offices around the globe, promoting in the common interest with its partner countries good governance, political education programs, and thematic exchanges. In South Asia, Hans Seidel Foundation Pakistan has focused, among others, on good governance and non-traditional security challenges, such as climate change, as well as on the establishment of regional networks, such as the Young South Asia Network. I'm very confident that today's discussion and insights shared during this event will help us all deepen our understanding of the issues at hand and identify practical solutions to create responsive and inclusive urban local government systems in South Asia. Once again, I would like to thank our distinguished speakers, panelists, and participants. And I want to wish you all fruitful discussion and interesting exchange of ideas and concepts. Thanks a lot to the organizers, Deepak and Bilal, for organizing this event. I think it's a big success to have so many interested stakeholders here from South Asia. And I would like to thank you for your attention. Have a nice event. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hergenröther, for these insightful remarks. And I would like to extend the same credits for organizing these events to all the YSAN fellows. So see, the core strength of any network are its members. And we at HSF are particularly proud of our fellows who are not only distinguished in their own diverse fields, but are also committed to regional connectivity and coming up with regional solutions to these common challenges through their commitment to the networks like this one. So for this, you will see increased contribution from the fellows during this event. We have Mr. Debashi Gupta from India with us, Mr. Achala Arunalu from Sri Lanka, Mr. Arif Nezami from Bangladesh, and Ms. Ayesha Majid and Ms. Mavra Bari from Pakistan, who will present specific case studies from their own cities on the topics of this event. So, but first of all, I am pleased to invite Ms. Sana Khan, YSAN Fellow from Pakistan, to briefly introduce today's session. Sana is currently associated with the Sustainable Development Practice Group at the World Bank in Pakistan. She is engaged in various sustainable development policy operations to assist the government and takes pride in having contributed to Pakistan's country updates on sustainability issues. She is passionate about making a difference by creating value to meet global SDGs, and her technical interests are clean energy and climate action for sustainable development. Please go ahead, dear Sana.
Thank you so much, Bilal. So, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Young South Asia Network, I welcome you all to our first alumni event, Responsive Urban Local Governance in South Asia. As mentioned, we were founded in 2022. Currently, we are a group of 21 individuals representing 8 South Asian countries and excelling in diverse professional backgrounds while associated with different government offices, multilateral organizations, NGOs, educational institute, law firm, media house, and while some are entrepreneurs. During our first in-person interaction in Germany, we all realized that we all share a lot more in common than the differences and distances being embargoed upon us. HSF has taken a very exemplary effort in bridging this gap and opening a route of cross-border dialogue to learn from each other's experiences and synergizing efforts to achieve common SDG goals in the region. South Asia is one of the most vulnerable regions to climate shocks. More than half of all these South Asians, or 750 million people in 8 countries, have been affected by one or more climate-related disasters in the last 2 decades. We are now experiencing temperature increases, which is becoming a new climate normal for the region, and it is predicted that we will observe hotter weather and longer monsoon seasons. This motivated us to narrow down our conversation today in our first webinar on urban flooding and increased heat, since summer and monsoon months are approaching us. The region's extreme vulnerability has long been apparent, and tracing back, these risks are culminated and their impacts become manifold owing to the weak local urban governance in our respective countries. While the environmental and economic costs are grave, there are also social costs associated with local government's failure to tackle these climate-triggered urban flooding and increased heat. This session is an effort in understanding these issues and seeking out possible solutions in the context of local governance, and most importantly, to pave a way for future interventions by our network to achieve institutional strengthening, good governance, and enhance resilience in South Asia. We are very privileged to have a distinguished group of experts with us today and looking forward to learn from their rich discussion. We will begin our session with a broad overview of local urban governance, its challenges, opportunities, best practices, as well as future discourse by our 2 esteemed keynote speakers. Following that, we have a panel discussion to have a more specific discussion on urban flooding and heat in the context of local governance, as there are a number of ways in which local governments' delivery of goods and services can address climate change risks and opportunities. And finally, we will end our session with 4 case studies by our YSAN fellows from Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. So now I would like to invite Bilal to take the stage back and formally begin the session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sana, for this comprehensive introduction of the project. So our first keynote speaker is Ms. Shahnaz Arshad. Shahnaz is the Senior Urban Specialist at the World Bank based in Islamabad. She has been associated with the World Bank for over 2 decades, during which she has worked extensively on policy development and implementation in multiple sectors, including urban management, design and municipal infrastructure, local governance, housing, and urban regeneration. She has served as the team leader for several projects, including the FATA Urban Centers project and the Punjab Municipal Services Improvement project. Shahnaz holds a master's degree in architecture from Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and we are very pleased to have you with us. Over to you, Ms. Arshad.
Thank you so much, Bilal and Sana and Andreas. First of all, I would really like to thank YSAN and the HSF for inviting me. It's a great privilege to be here and to see so many young professionals wanting to learn about the development issues that are facing us in South Asia. It's a pleasure to meet you all. I've been asked to talk about local governments. It's a subject which is not only very close to me, but also a subject on which I've been working for quite some time with the World Bank and developing projects and programs which support the local governments. Now, just stepping back broadly, I'm sure you all know that generally there are 3 levels of government. In some countries, the smaller countries, there are 2. But where there are 3, there are central or federal as one, the highest tier of government, then the provincial or state level, and then the local government level. Local governments being the lowest tier are closest to the people. And since the government is all about serving the people or the citizens of the country, so they are closest to where the issues lie and where the development sector really needs to be focusing upon. Generally also, there are separate governments for rural and urban areas. There have been some aberrations where the same local government has covered both urban and rural space, but the general norm is separate urban local governments and separate ones for rural, because the structures need to be very different. Their mandates are also pretty broad. So they include not only collections of tariffs, taxes, and fees for the services that they perform, but also they undertake planning, they undertake regulation, also provide a number of municipal services. Municipal because these are generally called municipalities where there are urban local governments concerned. And those services range from water, sanitation, solid waste management, street lights, parks, playgrounds, etc. Normally, they also provide housing as well as basic social services. So basic health, primary education, and some also do licenses, whether it's professional licenses or others, birth and death registrations and such services at the local level. South Asia is getting to be very urbanized, although the official figures do not really reflect what is the actual situation on the ground, because official figures generally tend to miss a couple of things. Firstly, there is a definitional issue or a classification issue. Cities are going very rapidly, but the urban boundaries or the city boundaries do not get updated as rapidly as the cities grow. So most of them are spilling out of their formal boundaries. But when we look at the figures that officially are there, they only look at the urban built-up areas within the boundaries. So there is a little bit of underreporting of what is the percentage of urban population in these cities. Secondly, the definition itself varies among the countries that we are looking at. Secondly, the World Bank also came out with a major report on urbanization, and what we call it's a messy urbanization because it's not planned. Most of the cities are growing in an unplanned manner, and there is a lot of also ad hoc development, and then spaces left over, and then development happening due to a number of reasons at a distance. So that skipping over also tends to make the cities a little messy and a little sort of chaotic, to put it in that manner. But local governments and local governance in South Asian countries tends to remain very critical, as is the case all over the world. A very important sort of part they play, or role they play, is that they groom political leadership for higher levels. And political leadership, which rises from the local level or through local politics, tends to really have the insights and knowledge of what are the challenges being faced by the people at the local level. Cities are growing fast, as was also mentioned earlier, because they provide livelihood opportunities, and therefore they attract people and attract migration. And because cities are growing and urbanization is higher, it leads to a structural change in the economy, and which has a very positive correlation, if you look at it globally as well as in South Asia, between higher rates of urbanization as well as the GDP growth of that country or of that province. Because cities, as you know, are called engines of economic growth, and they begin to contribute more and more as their size becomes larger and as their economic activity, which is the source of livelihood of people, which is the source of attracting people in turn, begins to increase. Cities also tend to be sort of hosting specialized skills. So you will find, for example, a neurosurgeon in a city, not in a rural area or in a very small town. And therefore they make or they provide an enabling environment for innovation. They also are markets for products, which are products either from the hinterland or the rural produce, or the agricultural produce. So there is a lot that happens in the cities, and therefore they contribute much more to the economy. But the challenge is, as Andreas also mentioned, how to make urbanization sustainable. Because urbanization, while it continues to happen, if it is chaotic, if it is messy, then it is not really contributing to either the SDGs very well or as much as it should, or to the sustainability of the GDP and its contribution to the GDP. So I'll come to now briefly mentioning what we've been doing in the World Bank, just to give you a flavor of where we have been able to at least get the governments to look at some of the issues that local governments face. And remember, World Bank generally only engages when a government requests it to engage. So we are seen to be, in a way, or we are called upon when the government thinks that we bring in value added, and we are not supply driven, we are always demand driven. So, for example, in Pakistan, a number of provincial governments requested World Bank support. And what we have seen over a number of years to be the critical challenges, and these tend to also reflect broadly in many of the other South Asian countries. Firstly, there is institutional fragmentation across agencies and departments in the government. So, for example, while a number of the mandates that I just mentioned above need to be at the local level, we find that some of those get fragmented either at the provincial level or in service delivery entities which are reporting to the province. And if the mandates are fragmented, then, as you know, nobody takes the responsibility, and therefore the services tend to be impacted negatively. Then local governments generally also have weak capacities. While they may have the mandates that they require, the capacities are not commensurate with the mandates, and neither are the finances. Local governments do have avenues of own source revenue from which they develop or they derive their finances, but they are not at par with the mandates that they are given. So the responsibilities are much higher than the finances they have available. So they are generally dependent on then transfers from the higher levels of government. We also find that planning tends to be weak. Now, this varies within countries and across countries, where the states and provinces are more sophisticated or their systems are better. We find that even local governments tend to do better in terms of a lot of their mandates. But where that is not the case, the governments are weaker. So, for example, in Pakistan, Punjab tends to be far better than, for example, Balochistan, and therefore the local governments also in Punjab tend to be a little more sophisticated than those in Balochistan. Now, coming back to planning, because planning is weak, it tends to be ad hoc. It tends to have political interference and political influences as to what gets planned and what gets delivered. And that also is leading to urban sprawl, and therefore cities are growing horizontally rather than vertically. And what that means is that when cities grow horizontally, the lengths of services that need to be provided are more and therefore become much more expensive per capita. So while the resources are limited, the expenditures become higher, and that tends to create issues on its own. And then again, depending on who the leader is in the local governments, whether it's a mayor or whoever, citizen participation tends to vary. In some, it's more, and therefore they are aware of what the real issues are, but in many, it's not. So in terms of the response that at least the bank programs have had sort of incorporated in their design. Firstly, we have been supporting a number of provinces and local governments in the provinces through a policy level dialogue with the higher levels of government, where we have been trying to influence them as to what kind of local government act or law needs to be there and what elements need to be there to provide them the requisite mandates, to provide them with the requisite financing, the authority, and the responsibilities. In Punjab, we've had successive programs, which are built upon the results of the previous ones. And therefore, the programs in Punjab that we are now implementing are also looking at more sophisticated results than in other provinces. We've also done programs in KP. In KP, there have been more sort of CDD kind of initiatives. In FATA, which Bilal also mentioned, we've had a program. And then we have looked very closely at the institutional capacities and the institutional strengthening mechanisms that are required to basically make them be able to deliver on whatever mandates they are responsible for. So, for example, improving their processes and procedures, introducing e-governance systems to bring in more transparency and efficiency, induction of skilled HR, which has also been important in getting them to do better. Training, not just classroom training, but hands-on training on these e-governance systems and on the processes and procedures that have been improved. And also looking at results-based financing. Now, this is very important because generally what has been the norm in South Asia, and I worked in Bangladesh, in India, and Sri Lanka, the norm has been looking at input-based financing. So they are given a budget, they make a budget, and then they allocate funding to various initiatives. But the results of that funding is not necessarily of such a focus. So through what we call a Program for Results instrument in the World Bank, we have been trying to get local governments as well as provincial and federal government to focus on what are the results achieved through that financing, and having a performance-based results approach that local governments need to perform. They need to start getting into a competition with each other, and only then would they get the financing that they require. Otherwise, they get a very basic financing, which is more formula-based. In planning, we have introduced participatory planning, but also what we are looking at is not just planning in terms of spatial planning, which is generally the norm, but looking at integrated development planning, which is not just new projects, but also asset management, so maintenance of the assets that they already have. And we are looking at it from an evidence-based perspective, so gathering data to see where the needs lie, and then having stakeholder participation for them to identify priorities based on the needs identified through a technical process. We've also been introducing computerized financial management system, performance-based systems, which look at service delivery indicators and performance of local governments. Also, very importantly, we are looking at making them transparent through websites, through access to information, as well as through GRM systems, so that the citizenry can actually reach out to them and to then register complaints, which then have a process of then being of management processes, which, as many of you would know, the World Bank is very, very serious about, whether it's social development or environmental issues. And the World Bank framework for environment and social management is now moved from a do no harm approach to a do good approach. So every project is required to also contribute to the social and environmental benefits of the populations and the beneficiaries that it serves. We have been introducing also energy efficiency through getting energy audits done of assets of local governments and energy management plans developed, which then identify where energy could be saved, and which in turn is actually reducing their expenditures and therefore adding to their revenues. Also introducing solar power for tube wells, for the water supply system, rainwater harvesting, and looking very critically that trees are not cut. So in fact, under one ongoing project, we had to change the design of, for example, some parking sheds that were being developed so that trees could be saved. And whatever could not be saved, they were relocated. So they were not cut, but they were saved in either changing of design or relocation. We've also, in the World Bank, done some regional initiatives. And I know that as YSAN, you're interested in how collaboration could happen. So there is a Central Asia, South Asia transmission line, which is happening. Again, it's energy, but energy looking at how to collaborate between the two regions. There is a leveraging urbanization regional report, which we've done, which is very interesting, and I hope that many of you would look at it.
Ms. Arshad, sorry to disturb you, but we are pressed for time, so if you can
we're
just...
running out of time. So I'm just coming to the last part where I was just going to suggest what YSAN fellows could do in this arena. So firstly, there is a lot of need for primary research on critical issues in local governance. Mostly we look at secondary and tertiary level of analytics, but primary research is critical. And also while you're having this internal debate, I would hope that YSAN fellows could also undertake informed debates and information dissemination, which could, develop a dialogue in these countries on issues that you find important and interesting, and which could also then help the society. Thank you very much for your time and for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Arshad, for these wonderful insights on how the local urban governance structures are organized in Pakistan and where the interventions can have optimal impact. Next up, we have Mr. Joydeep Gupta with us. Mr. Joydeep is the editor-at-large at the Third Pole. It's an environmental news website focusing on Himalayan region and South Asia. He's the lead trainer at workshops for environmental journalists from South and Southeast Asia. Mr. Gupta has covered several UN environmental summits, including the iconic 1992 Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, and has reported earlier for several international publications, including the Sunday Observer and the Statesman. For his contributions to environmental journalism, Mr. Gupta won the 2012 Green Globe Award at Delhi Sustainable Development Summit. He holds a master's in environmental economics and environmental management from University of York in the United Kingdom. And we are pleased to have you with us. Over to you, Mr. Gupta.
Thank you very much, Bilal, and thanks to the organizers. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Thank you.
Yes.
Good. I'm very glad to see some old friends and make some new friends. Hi, Afia. When I accepted the invitation to talk to Young South Asia Network, I had some thoughts in mind, which actually gel pretty well with the points given to me by the organizers. Because I have been covering environmental issues, which definitely include issues of urbanization in this entire region for many years. And I have often found one of the problems is to dissipate your energies in trying to do too many things at the same time, in trying to get into too many areas. That's why I was very, very enthused when Sana pointed out that you're going to drill down on two aspects of urban issues: heat stress and urban flooding. If this network can even partially alleviate even one of them, you would have done more than almost everybody else combined. So I very much support your thoughts of drilling down on this. I very much support your thoughts of actually using your network strength to look at best practices and how they can be replicated across. Because as Dr. Arshad pointed out, it's very important not only to have some good projects in some towns somewhere, but to scale them up and scale them out. Otherwise, you're not really going to get too much of a change coming. Having said this, there was another point that I wanted to make before I started, and that is, I'm very glad that Hans Seidel, a German foundation, is actually taking this initiative, because I've always been a big admirer of the Freiburg model of urbanization. And I'm pretty sure that many of you know the Freiburg model of urbanization. And I often hear that, oh, the Freiburg model of urbanization is too difficult to do in a developing country. I really don't see why. It is a model that is based on common sense more than money and technology. And there is no reason to think that there is less common sense available in developing countries than in developed countries. So I would urge you, if you are not familiar with the Freiburg model, to look at it. I'm sure HSF will help you in looking at that model and see how that can help in areas, especially such as they do a lot of work on urban transport, public transport. They do some work on urban flooding that you should be looking at. Let me start now with heat. Dealing with heat. We all know this, and I'm not going to repeat anything that all of you know, that we are in for 50-degree days in South Asia. We are definitely in for 50-degree days in large parts of South Asia. Jacobabad already has been hitting that regularly. And there are cities in Rajasthan and Gujarat in India that are hitting that quite often, and more areas are hitting that. So what's one to do about heat stress? When you talk about heat stress, I think it's necessary to be able to come up with a proper plan at the municipal level to segment your citizens into those who have access to air, to mechanically or electrically cooled areas, so whether they're offices or their homes, and those who do not. And among those who do not, I think it's also necessary to have two large segments: those who are indoors for the hottest time of the day, and those who are outdoors for the hottest time of the day. Once you have done this, I think you will find that there are heat action plans which can be replicated very successfully and without spending almost any money, that have already been developed and, importantly, shared across political boundaries and are working across countries. I'm talking specifically of Karachi municipality picking up the Ahmedabad Heat Action Plan, and which has, according to the Karachi municipality, actually reduced mortality in the summers in Karachi, especially the poorer parts of Karachi, in the last few years. This, to me, is an extremely encouraging example of working across South Asia. And I do hope that this is replicated across many more cities, because this is something that all of us are going to be grappling with. Now, I'm just going to go into one or two of the salient aspects of the Heat Action Plan, because they are so simple that when you actually think about it, you'll wonder why nobody had thought about it before. The simplest plan that actually has been helping people avoid heat stroke is to have an SMS service for the people in the city, in which the municipality tells them by 8 o'clock in the morning how the day is going to be. So take your precautions. If it's going to be a very hot day, do drink extra water before you go out. Do avoid going out unless you must. If you're going to work, go early. Very sensible, common sense things which do not cost a paisa. That is an important thing. Second one, again, low-cost solution. All of you know that there are many people living in all our cities who not only do not have air conditioners or air coolers or sometimes even fans, but they live in homes that have tin or asbestos roofs. Tin and asbestos roofs make your home much hotter on a summer day than other kinds of roofs. What can you do about it? What you can do about it is to put white paint on top of the roof. It reflects more heat. It's a simple, low-cost solution, which has been pioneered by the municipal authorities in various cities and has actually been seen by researchers to reduce heat stress significantly in the poorer parts of a city. A third part, and I'll end this heat action plan possibility here, are those who have to be outdoors for their daily work. Your rickshawalas, your construction workers, they do not have the luxury of being indoors in the hottest times of the day. What can the municipality do for them? It was found out that there is a British era law in all our countries, which many municipalities haven't even thought of changing, which asks municipal authorities to keep public parks locked up from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Apparently, because people were at some point in time, the British authorities had found that people were using that for gambling or drinking or whatever. Simply changing this rule enables people to get shade during the day, during the hottest times of the day. They can go and sit under a tree. They can even ply their trade if they are vegetable vendors, for example. They can continue to ply their trade under a tree. And if it requires a simple amendment to the existing law, and it is so simple that you'll find that most of your corporators are not even aware that such a law exists. And that is why I say it is important for a network like Young South Asia Network to push. Because if you leave these things to governments, you're not going to get anywhere. You'll have to push at an individual and at a network level. And that has been my experience, that whenever it has worked, whenever governments have worked, they have done so because of pressure from below. when they work due to pressure from above, from their political masters, it's always a very temporary ad hoc solution. It is only when they have real pressure from below that you get this kind of solution that is both usable and sustainable. I'm going to talk very little about urban flooding and stop. Urban flooding is largely in South Asia. Largely urban flooding is the result of people illegally taking over water bodies in our cities. There is no other way of sugarcoating this. This is a fact. Its encroachment leads to urban flooding in all our cities. All our cities, water bodies, ponds, lakes are being filled in, almost always with connivance of the municipal authorities, are being filled in by unethical real estate people, and houses are being built. And the result is that when it rains, the water has nowhere to go and you get urban flooding. So it is important for a network like YSAN to point this out, to make a noise about it. It is only when you actually make a noise about it that anything will happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Gupta, for highlighting these concrete examples of mitigating heat stress and urban flooding at the local level in South Asia. We understand that the audience members must have questions lined up for the keynote speakers. So you can already share your questions in the chat, and the Q&A session will be held after the panel discussion. So now we'll move on to the panel discussion topic. And we have an impressive lineup of eminent experts from the region on the topic. So for this, I will request Ms. Afia Salam, our moderator for this session, to take the stage and begin the panel discussion with panelists' introduction. About her, Ms. Afia Salam is a freelance journalist with experience of print, electronic, and web journalism. She focuses on environment, climate change, gender, and other rights-based issues, and also volunteers with some development organizations working for community uplift. She is also a member of the National Climate Change Council, that is an advisory body for the Prime Minister of Pakistan. So over to you, Ms. Salam. Ms. Salam, there is some audio issue from your side. We cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, please go.
Okay, my apologies. I thought technology may work for me, but somehow it doesn't. So I would like to again thank you, say thank you to Hans Seidel Foundation for asking me to moderate this panel discussion with some very eminent panelists who have a large body of work focusing on the topic at hand, which is the problem of heat, which incidentally has actually come into focus over the last, I think, about 10 to 15 years. It has, unfortunately, it has only been looked at in the context of a meteorological phenomenon. And it was only after the Ahmedabad heat wave and the Karachi one in 2015 that people started looking at it as an urban issue, which has to be dealt with by the government. So it wasn't, seen as something that the government had to do anything about, and especially the lack of local governance structures absolutely laid bare the problems you have when you don't have such structures in place. But I would like to first, before elaborating on this issue, like to introduce my esteemed panelists. So we have Dr. Nausheen Anwar. She's the director at Karachi Urban Lab, which is at the Institute of Business Administration in Karachi. She's the founder and director of Karachi Urban Lab and professor of city and regional planning at the School of Economics and Social Sciences at IBA. She received her PhD in city and regional planning from Columbia University and has held postdoctoral positions at Howard University and at the National University of Singapore. Her research looks at the interactions between vulnerability, climate change impacts, etc., like heat, extreme and chronic. And, this is something that it will be very interesting to hear from her, because generally we don't make that distinction. Urban flooding, which has been described very correctly by Joydeep as a planning problem rather than a climate change and meteorological issue. Because when we lay these issues at the doorstep of climate change, then we sort of absolve our municipal institutions from their responsibilities or crimes of omission and commission. She also focuses on post-colonial histories and context of infrastructure, violence, land displacement, and anti-poor urban planning in the urban global south. She's a recipient of grants of various national and international institutions and has published widely in reputed academic journals. She's deeply committed to public outreach to advance the understanding of global urban issues to foster the development of humane and politically inclusive cities. Then I'm honored to have Shuchi Vora, Resilience Knowledge Coalition Lead at Global Resilience Partnership. She is a conservationist, social scientist, and an engineer who works at the interface of science, policy, and practice. She has worked with WWF and the Nature Conservancy prior to the Global Resilience Partnership. She has experience in strategy design, setting up multi-stakeholder platforms, and implementing community-based conservation projects of freshwater ecosystems. Another very, very important segment that needs focus. Freshwater systems in South Asia. She has a master's degrees from Oxford and Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. She currently works with GRP as a Resilience Knowledge Coalition Lead. I'm also honored to have Neaz Rahman, who's an urban planner. He is an urban planner from Bangladesh. He works as an independent consultant in urban and regional planning for international development organizations such as the United Nations. He has also previously served as project manager at UNDP, leading the preparation of strategic planning of Dhaka's water supply, which involves consulting school children. And it's such a good nexus that we are here talking through the YSAN network, which is focused on the actions that the youngsters will take because they are the custodians of the future and they will be impacted most by the kind of a world we are going to sort of hand over to them. And they need to be part of the solutions, and the solutions have to also come from them. So these conversations of the panel discussion will center around urban heat, urban flooding as a subtext, and an inadequate urban built environment, which are supposed to deal with both. And I will keep referencing back to our esteemed keynote speakers because they have already touched upon these things and how the problems like Joydeep mentioned, those very, very commonsensical solutions that were cited for the Ahmedabad heat wave plan, which was adopted by the Karachi municipality. And I would like to mention here before I go to my panelists, that it is these collaborations which are cross-border, which bring us the hope for the future. The Ahmedabad heat wave plan had a very big component of knowledge and input and expertise from two Pakistanis who were working for cross-border knowledge management organization. And it was very readily adopted by the Karachi municipality because it just made the right sense. So there are so many similarities of problems in South Asia, and I wish, we could have had people from Nepal and Bhutan and Sikkim and Sri Lanka. And maybe, these conversations can actually flow out from these panels and to those areas also, because we have common problems in the global South, which require common solutions, which cannot be hamstrung because of the top level relations that the countries, or rather the lack of relations that the countries are hamstrung by. And it is the people who can, break those boundaries and collaborate and cooperate with each other. So I would like to come to my panelists and actually request them to unpack the conversation around urban heat and how it is being understood in our three different countries from where our panelists belong. So Dr. Nausheen Anwar, can you just share with us of when that conversation actually went above the radar and spilled out over beyond the meteorological and climate change and environmental fraternities?
Thank you so much, Afia. And I'd just like to begin first by thanking the Young South Asia Network for inviting me to be a part of this forum amongst very esteemed guests, and especially with Afia chairing this particular panel. So on the question of heat, this is something, well, heat and urban flooding, both part of the same cycle, both are also, often we think that heat is entirely global warming related. It is partially and it isn't. And so when we think about the urban context, the impact of global warming is particularly complex because global warming in the context of the urban or cities interacts with urban heat islands, which generate their own complex temperature dynamics, and also in turn sort of coalescing, overlapping with ultraviolet radiation, the exposure that happens in specific cities that lie 30 degrees north and south of that particular parallel that the US Department of Agriculture, I think it was, Environment and Agriculture, took out a report several years ago saying that, there are certain regions above 30 degrees north and 30 degrees south of this particular parallel that are particularly exposed to UV radiation and solar exposure. So it's a combination of all these factors. So heat is a complex thing. So in the Pakistan context, and certainly, or even more broadly in the South Asia context, heat has now gone, certainly is on the radar in a very big way, starting with the Ahmedabad heat mitigation plan, which was then adopted by the Karachi municipality also. Well, although I'm a little hesitant to use the word municipality because it was the Karachi Commissioner's Office, so which is sort of an overlay of British colonial rule. Our municipal governance system is still very much in the shambles. It's not as if the Karachi Municipal Corporation took it upon itself to take action on this. But in any case, the Karachi Heat Wave Action Plan has been a very important intervention. But I personally do still have certain. I'm not a critic of the plan, but I certainly have critiqued it. So at the Karachi Urban Lab, we took out a scoping study looking at how much Karachi has warmed over the last 60, 70 years, using the city as a proxy to unpack the complexities of heat, starting first by looking at the urban heat island effect, and then global warming and ultraviolet radiation and so forth, and then also further unpacking the issue of heat governance. And some of the weaknesses that we see, some of the gaps, if one could call it that, is very much about governance. And so the heat wave action plan certainly does make a difference in terms of issuing or triggering the issuance of early warning systems. What one of our earlier speakers, Dr. Joydeep Gupta, mentioned that cell phones are very important because you get early warning systems on there, and this can alert people to stay indoors. But there is a problem with that also. So for instance, in our own work, we have found, and this certainly came up in the work of other non-governmental organizations such as HANDS, for instance, that these early warning systems are also highly gendered. So for instance, cell phones are not necessarily accessible by poor women, and especially young women. There are certain kinds of sanctions put on young unmarried women, or poor women cannot afford them. So in our own study, we're just completing this quite a large data set. We launched last year a 15,000 household survey and a 5,000 commercial survey of informal workers, looking at the impact of heat, looking mostly at heat perceptions of heat effects inside homes, looking at a gamut of from low income to poor to middle income, and then also livelihood systems, informal workers. And what we found was, sort of in the broader, data survey, and this will be coming out very, very soon, is that, almost 50, 60%, and this is just a very rough estimate to sketch out just, what is the, sort of how far reaching is the heat wave action plan and these early warning systems. Almost 60% of the households where we conducted our survey said they'd never heard of any heat wave action plan or any early warning systems and so forth. So, and this was also highly gendered. So the gender aspect is a very important one in terms of how we think about heat risk mitigation and the impact of early warning systems. Who has access to cell phones is also a question of power. This is a very important aspect to keep in mind. And then, of course, the distinction between extreme heat and chronic heat. So often we think that heat is something that is entirely external, but heat is also that is generated from certain kind of intrinsic forces that are part of the built environment. It's largely in terms of how we have built our cities and how we have planned our cities over the last 100+ years. And, while some people say that there is no planning in cities in Pakistan, I'll say, well, there's tons of planning, but planning is socially unjust. And that is the fundamental issue, that we need to call out not messy or chaotic urbanization or lack of planning, but that planning is socially unjust. At one extreme, you have certain kinds of plans that are unfolding in cities like Karachi and across other places in Pakistan for middle-income, high-income housing schemes that are very well planned. And then at the other extreme, you have informal settlements, low-income settlements, which have grown certainly not in an ad hoc fashion. There is a certain kind of a plan behind that also. But these are precisely the parts of the city or those spatial zones, socio-economic spatial zones that are the most vulnerable to heat effects, both external as well as intrinsic. And by intrinsic, I mean precisely the relationship between the human body, the physiological dimensions, the thresholds that are now being breached, and its relationship with the built environment. And again, these are highly gendered. And then this is where the issue of chronic heat becomes particularly important. Extreme heat as a one-time event certainly happens when we get heat waves, but chronic heat is something that sustains itself over a period of months and months and months. And now, as we are seeing in cities across Sindh and even other parts of Pakistan, that summers have become longer. And we've certainly provided some very hard-hitting evidence in our report on Karachi to show precisely how much the summers in a city like Karachi have lengthened. Then this is where the chronic heat exposure aspect comes in. So you may not necessarily have a heat wave, but people's perceptions of indoor temperatures and outdoor temperatures are in turn sort of mitigated and made possible or shaped by social, economic, and material vulnerabilities. And this is where, I think chronic heat is even more complex in certain ways. And this is where, for instance, heat wave action plans kind of fail, by and large. And this is, by the way, not just the Ahmedabad and the Karachi heat wave action plan. This is across the board globally, that these heat wave action plans don't take into consideration the importance of chronic heat, which is really what's happening indoors. So I'm on the advisory board of the World Meteorological Organization and the World Health Organization, which has now taken a very deep interest in looking at the risks that arise from indoor overheating. And this is in relation not only to low-income households, but also prisons and other kinds of settings, schools and other kinds of places. And chronic heat, we're beginning to understand, actually poses an even higher risk because of different sets of complexities. And so opening up the black box of heat really sends us in so many different directions. And now with global warming as a pervasive and inevitable dynamic, I think looking more and more into the complexities of external effects of heat through heat waves and the more intrinsic aspects of chronic heat is certainly very important, and especially in terms of issues of intersectionality, where we put gender, especially very much at the center of this, and also then issues of class and caste and ethnicity and the spatial aspect and histories of planning and so forth. So I'll stop right there.
Thank you. You really unpacked the whole gamut, of how this issue needs to be looked at, and focusing on the intersectionality, I think, is the way to go forward to try to even first gain a proper understanding. And this is not just a global South issue, but it is a global issue. But yes, these are the countries in our region, especially the countries that are represented here in this specific forum, have been hit already. And they have to get an understanding. So with Vora, now you, other than looking at the aspect of heat, you look at it in the context of water, and especially the availability of urban water. So how would you like to contextualize your studies and your research on ground, and that how much of that understanding is now seeping into the local governance?
Thanks. Great question. Well, so a few different things. Even before I start talking about how the understanding of water issues seeps into local governance, I think firstly there are definite global gaps in understanding of how heat and water are linked. So even before we start with the government's or the governance's understanding, or the stakeholders or the actors' understanding of the linkages. I think heat and water are, the fact that heat and water are strongly linked is something that we are still grappling with. So we're still figuring out. And it's not just the fact, and I'm going to refer to, allude to some of the work that Dr. Anwar before me was talking about. The chronic heat that leads to higher evapotranspiration is theoretically probably a big factor, but another big factor is the way we are using water. And it's not just, not just using water for water and sanitation, but also the way cities are growing. And this also has direct links with both urban heat island effects and chronic heat in cities, but also what Mr. Gupta was mentioning earlier around wetlands being encroached and how our cities are growing. So, a lot of different complex aspects that connect to each other, and therefore how we manage our water becomes crucial, because at the end of the day, water is life. We are on planet Earth because Earth has water. Not just humans, but all systems, all living beings are dependent on it, and life grew out of water. So increasingly important to think about how the interplay of water and heat, water and urbanization, and water and development occurs, and how we conserve and protect our relationships with water will define how we are able to manage this crisis, whether it's whether it's inequitable access, or it's the planetary boundaries overshoot that we suffer. So that's largely how they're linked. And in terms of how it feeds into governance, I think what's critical is one, governance mandates, and I think this was mentioned earlier, governance mandates are fairly siloed in our context, especially because we've been gifted, and I use this very sarcastically, but we've been gifted the colonial rule of how we manage our cities, and how we've continued to use that for short-term gains rather than long-term benefits to communities, urban communities at large. So that leads to segmentation, and therefore a heat action plan will typically not think of how water is managed. A water plan for the city would typically not think of, in fact, a water plan would typically be highly segregated, in the sense that there's a disaster plan, there's probably an urban river plan, there is probably a city sanitation plan, or city urban plan, which does not take into account the water bodies in the city. So it's highly fragmented, and the planning itself, apart from being unjust, as Dr. Anwar was mentioning, it's also highly siloed in the way that it looks at its resources, where the cities look at their resources. And therefore, that kind of primarily affects how we manage the availability of water, and then therefore how we manage our heat, how we ensure equitable access, and how we ensure that our freshwater ecosystems are protected. So in sum total, and I think there are sporadic good examples which we really need to pick on. It's this group of people, it's youth brings in the optimism of being young, being fearless. And yes, you should ask the right questions, but you should also bring out the right kind of bright spots from, it's not just, I don't think I want to call them best practices, because there isn't a cookie cutter way of executing plans, and what we need to learn from are the processes. And therefore it's important that we pick on the nuances, we pick out the themes, we understand how cities work, how relationships are built, how trust is built between different actors, and governance is not just the mandate of the government, but it's the mandate of the people at the end of the day, because that's how cities are supposed to function. And yeah, and so I think there needs to be a picking of nuances of how we manage our resources, and understanding each of these aspects better, apart from just thinking about the silos of specific resources or specific disasters. We also need to kind of learn to link them together, and it's these networks which create those learning spaces for linking all these aspects together, understanding them in their entirety, and picking on those nuances and learning from each other, from those processes across countries, across boundaries, across regions even. I work with the Global Resilience Partnership, where we, and I'm a practitioner, so all of this is based on experience from practice. But I try to bridge that gap between research and practice, but my experience is strongly rooted in practice. So a lot of what I say comes from the lived experience of having been a practitioner across parts of South Asia, but also East Africa. And yeah, and so we try and build bridges between research practice. We try and build bridges between across boundaries, across South Asia, but also across South Asia and Southeast Asia, South Asia and East Africa and Southern Africa. So just ensuring that those linkages are built so that we can learn from each other. We can explore what those nuances are, and pretty much not replicate, but understand what worked, what didn't, and what can work in our own context. I think that is critical. That critical thinking mindset is extremely important. And the other thing I think is important is a systems thinking mindset. So understanding what I mentioned earlier, the linkages between heat, flooding, droughts, chronic water scarcity, and the city as a context in the larger region as well, as both a resource sink or a consumption sink, but also a livelihood giver space. So yeah, so recognizing all these aspects is critical, and we really do need to understand this from a systems perspective. I shall stop there, and we can probably delve into a few questions later.
Thank you so much, because for bringing to the fore the experience of your practice to this conversation, because this links very well, and you've taken it forward from what Dr. Nausheen was talking about, and you are talking of silos, and she's talking about the intersectionality, because you cannot really get a grip on this entire issue unless you break those barriers where people don't understand about the other sector. So I would now like to move to Neaz, because he already has worked out a plan. And this is something so important that I think I'm lucky to have panelists like all three of you, because one has unpacked the entire, the theory and the practice of the issue. The other one has brought in the experience, and the third one has already gone into the planning stage to deal with these issues. So Mr. Neaz, you have been a part of or rather you have developed the plan for Dhaka. And Dhaka is a very big urban center. So how do you see in an urban heat context, because we also have to see how the cities are interacting with the environment, because it's not just the humans who have a right over this land and over the water and over its resources. And if we are only looking at the cities, what about the environment? Where is that intersection playing out? And how is it going to affect it? So over to you.
That's fair. I started my work in '91 as a junior planner in a government office. So since then, I've been working in different projects in government. Then I left government office. I worked for the World Bank, ADB, UNDP, KFW, and then again as a consultant for government of Bangladesh, not as an officer. So throughout my journey, I was observing that there is something wrong with the theories we have been taught contextually wrong. Internationally, urban planning theories and curriculums that have been taught in the universities in Bangladesh and abroad are contextually wrong for Bangladesh. It was not working. So it has three different dimensions. One is ecological dimension. Ecologically, it was wrong. It is socially wrong and also politically not correct. So different I tried to do when I was not in the steering as only a team member. I tried to influence my team, but finally in Borishal master plan and then in Dhaka detailed area plan, where I was leading the team, I tried to address the issue of urban planning first philosophically, because I understood that what had been taught to us is not contextual. And copying things, experiencing, sharing technology is not accepted to me. Sharing knowledge is accepted. And there's a big difference between technology. That is what have been done in Hyderabad or in Karachi. That project cannot be implemented or replicated in Dhaka. It is absolutely wrong. And that is what we have been doing throughout the world. And that have been taught to us in our academia also. So I try to understand, not only me, a lot of architects and planners over here, they were looking after what is philosophically, theoretically wrong in the things we have been taught, contextually wrong. I'm not telling that this is scientifically wrong or it's contextually wrong. The first thing we realize that Bangladesh is not a land. We call it the fluid landscape. The water that crosses Bangladesh, the catchment area is 19 times bigger than Bangladesh. It expands into India and China because the major rivers, Ganges, Brahmaputra, and Meghna. It comes from the Himalayan north, south, Arakans east and west. And something time it's coming from Myanmar also. And most of the part of the Bangladesh is an active delta, it's not a mature delta. That means the river is moving continuously. If you see 200 years map, you see the whole Bangladesh was a river, one point of time or the other. But there are some critical places where there are stable lands. So those are the places where our forefathers used to build their urban settlements. But since 47, after 47 and 71, which is a legacy of the British colony, the academia, everything, the school and everything, we didn't change anything. So what we were doing, we were trying to find out a dry land, which we consider is a prerequisite for urban development, which have been taught in our academia in Bangladesh, and people from Bangladesh who went to abroad for higher studies or undergrads. That was the thing, that if you want to build a city, you need a clean, dry land. So we said we need to revisit these things. So the modern paradigm of has practically waged war against water through this conception of planned cities. So in the keynote paper, there was Shahnaz, Dr. Shahnaz was mentioning that the planned city and unplanned city. So in Bangladesh, we are trying to understand that these two words doesn't cover your whole city or the evolution or the history of the city. There are other words. That is spontaneous city, spontaneous development, which means that development was directly controlled by the community or a very strong local governments. And there is another thing, which is project-based development, which I think Nausheen was mentioning about Pakistan, that they are planned, but they are not just. They are not socially just. So when we need to describe a city, we need to know these four types typology. One is a planned, one is a project-driven development, one is spontaneous, and another is messy. So these are the things we try to understand when we were dealing with Dhaka. And how this thing happened worldwide, how this water and land have been segregated, and why water have been considered as a bad element to build a really a good urban development or city. So long ago, the whole idea was we splitting reality. We call it the Great Divide. Everything was divided into, this is 400, 500 years back story. Probably it started after the Renaissance. Everything is objective and subjective. Everything is good and bad. So either when I argue with you, if you are wrong, then I am right. If I am wrong, then you are correct. So there's only two out. But in Indian philosophy, there are four categories. Yes, you can be wrong and I am right, or the opposite, or we both can be wrong, or we both can be right. So these second groups, that we both can be right and both can be wrong, how can that? Because this is what comes the context. We both, what you are talking is correct in one context, and what I am talking is correct in another context. So these are the things we are trying to understand, how it influenced our cities. Then from there, it came the town and village. So the town, what happened? The people are non-agriculture. So they don't need to know what water is. So they started thinking, the people who planning and staying in the towns, they said that this is absolutely not needed. And when you split the ecosystem into good and bad, when anything you want to do, change the ecosystem, the only thing you are doing is destroying it, nothing else. And when we forgot that we are just part of the ecosystem, we are just another species, we are just in the net, one thread. We are not out of the net, and we can use that net. So what I was like to mention, that was Nausheen telling, that there, when we were doing this detailed area plan of Dhaka, we said we need to have two levels of justice. One is the social justice, what Nausheen was telling, and another is ecological justice. So we must recognize that we cannot segregate people into different class groups and ensure our security or welfare in any means. Exactly, if you don't understand the ecosystem can be segregated, cannot be segregated, then we are threatening our security and existence in another way. So these are the two things we were trying to understand. So what we did, we tried to understand that, because Bangladesh have a very old cities. This is one of the oldest cities we have in the Indian subcontinent. And in fact, Bangladesh is an extension, or Bihar and Bangla is in fact integrated civilization. It is very recently that it have been, recently means I said only said 300 years. These are two separate identities. So those cities and human settlements in Bihar and Bangla are very similar. So there, when I'm telling that Bangladesh is a fluid landscape, to counter the idea of dry land for urban development, nowadays when we describe Bangladesh ecosystem in terms of physical entity, we said that we call it wet paradise. This word is becoming very popular in Bangladesh. To counter that dry land, this wet paradise vocabulary is getting very popular. So dig and mound. So because this is a very old technology strategy, from the village to the small towns, secondary towns, and even the big towns, they used to dig big ponds to raise the land for activities which need like hospitals, buildings, residential areas, roads, to have a dry space. So instead of putting embankment, it was a dig and mount. So the water land balance is not hampered, and you have minimum dry spaces where you need to build your infrastructures or building facilities. So this is about 2000 years this strategy was being followed. It was really in big scale disrupted in 1950s, middle 50s, when East Pakistan Water and Power Development Board was constructed. And they took the charge of water management. And all these engineers were educated in alien countries, which is not contextual. So now we, in Dhaka, what we did, we have a very disastrous western embankment to protect the city from the western river, Turag. And there was also a suggestion with the same project, which was funded by World Bank, to have an eastern embankment. But because of the shortfall of money, the eastern embankment was not built. So in the new detailed area plan, we say, no, we don't need this eastern embankment, because we have a very bad experience with the western embankment. A big area is in real trouble with water loss. Joydeep, he mentioned very correctly, because probably after a long time, I heard somebody telling in this type of forum that this city water flooding, the main issue is that we are filling up the water bodies like the ponds, rivers, and canals. It is not the climate change which is not playing the major factor in this water urban flooding, at least in the subcontinent. So another thing is I want to mention that in our detailed area plan, we were having a big debate. Cities as engine of economic growth. If this is the criteria, how city is defined, I doubt any city in the world can compete with Dhaka. Because geographically, Dhaka is 1% of Bangladesh. It have a 10% of the population. And it contributes more than 1/3 of GDP. But if you come to Dhaka, it is a hell to live in. It is a hell to live in. So we said that this definition of city is rejected by our team. We said cities are human settlement. Cities have more other things to do than only look after the economic growth engine. So I think I'll stop.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. And actually, you've covered some things that I wanted to ask in our second round as well. And it's so good to hear that instead of continuing with the same practices, which we know are not working, there is a definite rejection of them and a complete reorientation of making it more holistic and more human-friendly. And you have also alluded to it. And my next question, of course, was going to ask that we rarely mention, especially here in South Asia, where it is most relevant, the elephant in the room, which is the population. And when we are talking about how to plan cities or even the organic growth of the cities, which is very unplanned and not as unplanned, because as Dr. Nausheen mentioned, there is a method to the madness we see. How do we factor in if we only look at growth? So what you have mentioned, Neaz, that it cannot only be looked at in the context of cities have to be engines of growth, because if that growth is detrimental to the ecology and to the rest of the things that have as much right on in the environment or in the space where we are, and there's a reason why it's called an ecosystem, because it isn't linear, it is circular.
Yeah.
So how does that understanding address the projections of how these cities are going to be inhabited? Because I mean, it's a personal thing, and all of you are experts, and I would like to be educated. When we talk about smart cities, again, we are talking about some systems, something that is going to be designed. And the way we have seen, our South Asian cities actually break those designs by the very pressure of the population. So how will you contextualize these issues with the growing population and its needs and the pressure on the resources? So I would like to just pose this one question to all three of my panelists before we wrap up. Okay, Ms. Vora, you wanted to go first? Dr. Nausheen? So I let her ask first. Yes, please. Go ahead.
Are you talking to me? Sorry.
Yeah, you had your hand up.
Not a doctor yet. You can call me Shuchi.
Joydeep got his doctorate here.
Yeah, exactly. I don't have a doctorate, so you can call me Shuchi. Anyway, I have a hard stop in about a minute, so I just quickly wanted to bring in one point, and this also again alludes to what Nausheen was talking about earlier about the unjust nature of planning, and it's similarly the unjust nature of distribution of resources or design that actually leads us to pointing to population as a root cause or a problem, because if you look at statistics, if theoretically if we were the highest populated region, we should also have been the highest consuming region if everyone were getting to consume fair and equal resources. I'm not using the term equitable yet, but equal resources. But there is definitely a small percentage of the population which consumes a lot more than a large percentage of the population in the entire region in South Asia. Inequalities are really high, and equitable distribution would definitely mean managing this power pie in a way that we can't continue on the trajectory that we are on of continued unsustainable growth. And that includes urbanization. This goes back to encroachment of wetlands, encroachment in the deltas, goes back to heat island effects and the way trees are cut in cities, but not just trees, even the drying of land because of the way we consume our groundwater. So it's a domino effect which is due to consumption of resources rather than population, and I think we need to reframe that a little differently. I'm sorry, I need to log off and I'll end there.
Thank you very much for the very valuable insights that you brought to this conversation, and we hope we can carry them on, at some point.
Indeed, lovely to connect, and I'd love to keep in touch. So thank you very much, everybody, for having me here. Great. See you.
See you. Bye. Thank you. So Dr. Nausheen, again, this is a very important point that she made, referencing it with what you said about the inequities and the injustices. And our cities are actually, I'm sorry, it seems that we are sort of running down the engineer's role in this, but there's a question in the Q&A, in the chat, which is referencing, and I think you have answered that, but we'll take it as soon as we finish our, so when it is designed and when it is engineered, how do we ensure that it is equitable and fair, not just to the humans, but all the other lives that exist on the planet? Because we have to live in sync with them. Otherwise, we also go out of sync.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Afia. That is such a loaded question. And there are so many different ways of coming at it, of answering it. So I think if I sort of begin with the kind of socially just infrastructure stock that we need to rebuild across our cities, and this is not just in Pakistan, but I would say this is across the board, across South Asia, and an infrastructure stock that is socially just, that is equitable, that takes into consideration the needs and aspirations and expectations of ordinary citizens, and that is a vast gamut when we talk about ordinary citizens, from the poor to the very poor. There are so many different categories now, low income, you name it. I mean, there are so many different kinds of categories. To what extent, not even to what extent, how can infrastructural designs and infrastructural planning take into consideration the needs and aspirations of ordinary citizens? I think, fundamentally, and I might be using a very old and somewhat worn out, lens over here, but as a planner, this is what I was taught, the ground zero of my training and my education, the importance of participatory planning, and which still remains. Now today we talk about pluriverses, plurality, multiplicity of voices, but I think fundamentally all of this once again has to do with keeping at the forefront the need for really socially just and now ecologically just participatory planning. And I would add to that thermally just participatory planning. How do we design cities that are thermally just? And this is a mega question that we really haven't even started to unpack. And what sits at the heart of that notion of thermal justice is really what the United Nations has already declared, and that's the SDG 7. The United Nations has already said that the SDGs, every SDG hinges on the SDG 7, which is about the provision of sustainable energy systems. Because as we go forward into a warming world, into a hotter world, especially in terms of where we are sitting in South Asia, the infrastructural planning that we need, a very important component of that is socially just and equitable and sustainable energy systems. So how are all of these going to be built? And how are all of these, important challenges going to take into consideration ordinary citizens' voices? And frankly speaking, I don't see that happening. Certainly not in Pakistan. And Afia, you are quite plugged into Pakistan's energy policy. You write about it. You're very, very tuned into the energy inequality issues that plague Pakistan today. We know that there is a political economy behind this. And I think that this is the sort of the dark moment where we know what the challenges are. We've read the IPCC synthesis report, the latest one, and it's a very alarming one, but we're also simultaneously seeing sort of the rollout of certain kinds of political exigencies that undermine everything else, right? And certainly cities in Pakistan, whether we run from Balochistan to Punjab to Sindh to KPK and elsewhere, we see these dilemmas, unfolding before us. So I think for me, the issue is that how do we hold governments accountable? How do we hold politicians accountable? How do we hold bureaucrats accountable? How do we create accountability systems at the end of the day? And this once again becomes a fundamental issue of governance. How can we create accountability systems then that enable ordinary citizens to speak to their local councillors and their nazims and so forth, where accountability is something that is real, that is socially and ecologically just, and it really lands up at the front door of your home and your flat and your high rise or your apartment, whichever way you want to see it. And this is where we need a radical rethink in terms of the kinds of governance structures that we need, that we must put in place for more sustainable and socially and ecologically just urban futures. And this is a mega task, frankly speaking. And I'm afraid I can't answer it in just one sitting. We could go on and on about this, so I'll stop right there. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, that is definitely a conversation that needs to be continuous, and the society needs to act as a watchdog to make it deliver in the manner that has been articulated by Mr. Neaz, that the Dhaka plan was actually developed by the experts, which somehow people are wary of, but it took into account the people's needs. So in your country, how resonant are the voices of the civil society, of the communities, and what Dr. Nausheen mentioned about the participatory development, is that a model that Bangladesh subscribes to? And is that a model that has been delivering successes from the old model that we all, I think, across subcontinent have been so used to, which is so detached from the needs of the people and from the benefits that need to go to them?
So this time, what we did, officially, legally, these urban plans are the most participatory, supposed to be the most participatory plan. Because in Bangladesh, only when you prepare urban plan, you have to put it into the public consultation, public hearing, not consultation. Public consultation you have to do during the project, and after you finish, after your government office have approved, then you have to go for public hearing for 60 days, and only after what happens over there, then government passes as a law. So officially that was fine. But what was happening, all the plans were written in English. In a country where I think 1 or 2% people really are good in English to understand such a document. Even I doubt even that is 1 or 2%, whether it is correct, it may be less than that. So what we did first, for the first time, we prepared the plan in local language, Bangla. So that gave a good access. Second, when we started the project, then we started talking with the media, with different issues, not with the plan. We provoked the media to write reports, to publish articles, go to the TV, and raise the issues that we will be addressing at the end of the plan. So almost throughout 1 year, we were provoking the media, the print and the electronic, to address these issues, what is happening in Dhaka. So by the time the document was for public hearing, people have, especially the journalists, have a different view which they had before about city planning. Because before that, all the plans, they were only asking what happened to the traffic jam, what happened to the water supply, what happened to the new housing projects. But all these things are outcome of an unjust planning system. These are all symptoms of the disease. These are not the real disease. When you have injustice, social injustice and environmental injustice, these are just the outcome. If you keep focus on these things, on your symptoms, you cannot get cured. I give you one example. We have a road construction in Dhaka, a big one. I'm not sure how kilometer, but in comparison to Dhaka, it's nothing. That road costs about 23,000 crore. Crore means 10 million. And that road is going to do nothing. We know. No, that's not going to relieve the whole Dhaka traffic congestion relief. That will work as an access road to some places. And in the new detailed area plan, we have asked for 627 schools, proper standard schools, a school in which I studied also. So I said, I studied in a very good school, and that was a government school. And that was one of the best schools in Dhaka. I said, we want all the children to be in that school. All the school will have a playground size of football field and a proper school building with all facilities all over the Dhaka. And for 627 schools, all the children for next 20 years can go to very good school, like what happening in Delhi also. And that project cost only 25,000 crore taka. So if you can spoil our tax money in a road with 24,000, why can't you give 25,000 for the whole education system in Dhaka? It will change everything. So this is what I said, that population in Dhaka is still not the #1 problem for us. The #1 problem is social injustice through how government invests and where it invests. With 5,000 crore taka, government can transform the whole bus system in Dhaka, which would carry 45% of the trips. The government is not investing over there, instead investing in metro, 172,000 crore taka, estimated. When it will be finished, it will at least be 3 to 4 times. In the report, it is written that after all the 5 metro lines are complete, it will only carry 11% of the trip. So instead of investing 5,000 for 45% of the people, you are investing 172,000 crore for 9%, 10% people. So we challenge everybody that still Dhaka is the densely populated, densely, not the biggest population, but the densely populated city in the world.
Yeah.
Still, we didn't find that population is #1 problem, rather than justice is the #1 problem, social and ecological justice.
So thank you so much, all my panelists. You know, this is such an important and ongoing conversation, and we've only sort of flagged many issues. We've flagged issues of injustice, of, you know, very, very skewed development paradigms, the planned and unplanned, you know, benefits to the people, how the planning brings benefits or not. And also, our keynote speaker, Shahnaz, she has given us an example of where local governance, because we have rather, you know, we have not mentioned local governance as such, as much in the conversation as we have spoken about the deliverables that they give to the people. So she's shown us a model where some things work when you have an efficient local governance, and also the voices that Dr. Nausheen has been, you know, clamoring for, if you will allow me to use that word, that we have to have people's voices there and participatory development, so we can sort of foresee the kind of problems that can come from the kind of development that Mr. Neaz has mentioned, you know, the engineered solutions. But I regret to say that the time is over. And I would have loved to have carried this on, but I have to go to the panel, the questions that the panelists have received in the chat. And also I'm opening this up. So Bilal, how will you take it? If there are people who are raising their hands, you will unmute them?
Yes, if
other than
there
the
are
ones in the
someone
chat.
from the participants, but mostly the questions are coming via chat.
Yes, and there is a question that came for Joydeep, who is not part of the panel, but he has this question. So he has already answered it over there. So to save time, should we first give a chance to people who want to ask a question? Because the other questions are there in the chat and that is accessible to all. Bilal, how do you want to go about it?
I think we should just stick to the ones in the chat. Yeah.
Oh, all right. Okay. So the first one was
I have to say goodbye. Thank you, everyone. I'll try to answer those questions, and please just email me any other questions, and I will answer them by email also. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you for that offer,
Thank you.
Dr. Nausheen, because this is a conversation that I'm sure whoever has joined in this forum is interested in, and they want to take it forward. Okay, so thank you and goodbye. Okay, there's a question for Joydeep. So how the pressures can be created from the bottom positively to make the changes. And Joydeep, you have given an answer. Would you like to repeat it?
Do I have to? I'm not sure if I'll do it, Afia, if everybody hasn't seen it. So essentially what I was trying to say is that you have to start in your own neighborhood with your own friends in your own area through small initiatives. Small initiatives can be as simple as making your own WhatsApp group in your condominium to figure out where how the day is going to be, and where your rickshawalas are going to find some shade in which to wait for you. And these things are zero cost, basically. It just needs initiative. But these have a very strong domino effect. Larger initiatives like the one that I have referred to in Bangalore have actually worked. The one in Calcutta is now really taking on the authorities on when it comes to filling up the marshes in the east of Calcutta, which are extremely important for the city's drainage system, but are very, very valuable real estate. I have also shared links to because frankly, many of us are unaware of how well over half our population actually experience a heat wave in their homes, the kind of heat stress they go through. There is an excellent piece by somebody, Afia, Amar Gurido,
Yes.
on experiencing a heat wave in a Karachi slum. I've shared the link to it. There are vlogs from Jacobabad, from Dhaka, from parts of India, which will basically tell you, everybody here, what are the small things you can do to handle heat stress. Heat action plans are good as long as they're implemented. And whenever you will go to municipal authorities, you will be told, oh, we don't have any money. Just about every municipal authority in South Asia is going to tell you this. We have no funds. So you should go to them as a group with ideas that do not require outlay of money on their part. And many of these ideas do not, to start with at least, require outlays of money. And once you form your virtuous circle, you can do a lot.
Absolutely. So I'm sure Mr. Neaz can also point us to some such collectives, if for lack of any other word, of citizens who do kind of understand.
Dhaka's got a lot of them.
Yeah. So, and in Pakistan also, because there's this tussle between the real estate developers, as you call it. I've sort of started using the spelling of development as DEVIL. I'm going to copyright it someday. So the thing is, the whole point is that we need to raise voices. There need to be forums, and with the new forums like the one we are right now interacting with these, and you mentioned the WhatsApp groups, it sort of seeds that kind of activism, which grows into a formal organization. In Karachi itself, we have this, like I mentioned, the elephant in the room, the population is there, and then that, sort of segues into the kind of development where, as all of you mentioned, only the top class benefits and the masses don't. So those were just these informal WhatsApp groups, which have actually become a collective, and they protest, they lobby, they litigate. And that doesn't really require a lot of money. It just requires the citizen ownership of these issues. So I will have to, there is one question to Mr. Neaz, that what percentage of the Dhaka plan and proposals are being realized in Dhaka, and what measures can be taken to execute it further? And I'm afraid I'll have to put the disclaimer here that after this question, I will have to wrap up this session. It's been a pleasure, an honor, and a privilege to have been a part of this. And again, the baton passes on to the YSAN, because they are the ones who can benefit from the kind of conversation that has taken place, and they can take that forward. So, Mr. Neaz, just
any master plans, urban plan, have two components. One is a project, another is regulatory part. Project part and regulatory part. So project part, you cannot say how much it will be implemented because our past experience is not very good. But the regulatory part will have, like the building construction regulations, the road which we approve as a formal road, that will obviously change, because previously the building construction regulations, not the civil part, the planning part, was such that Dhaka have only 5% of the building approved plan. More than 95% building cannot comply with that regulations. It was so high. So now we have changed. So people started getting the benefit, because if you don't have the plan passed by approved plan, then you don't get the formal electric connection, you don't get the water connection. you have to take informal or illegal connection, which is at least 10%, 10 times higher cost. So like when we were working in the office during the project, the house I stay is a 15 taka per square feet rent. It is a formal house. You can see in the back. It's well, good for me. And the peon who was working in that office is to live in a house which is 45 taka per square feet. In fact, he's staying in the slum. So my salary, you can understand and compare 10 times, 12 times. And his houses is 3 times more than mine. So these are the things will change because we change the regulation. Now they will have formal approval plans. They will have formal connections and the cost will drop drastically, 10 times. It will drop. And about the project, it will, because I hope it will, because what we did, we used the social media because we developed Facebook groups. So when the plan was open for the public hearing, then the status quo people who are getting benefited, the real estate developer and big landowners and the rich peoples, they understand that things are going against their interest. So they started taking over the formal media. The paper and electronic media were not giving our access to talk to the people. So we, at that time, we started using the Facebook and WhatsApp, all those things. And it worked. They couldn't.
Thank you. So this actually shows that this is a way forward. The newer generation can use these new tools for advocacy, for, you know, for actually getting the collective wisdom of the kind of a world they want to live in, you know, rather than our generation imposing the solutions, which haven't really worked for us either. It is they who will, who need to design their own solutions.
Like during the public hearing, the whole report was uploaded in the website. So, and it was in Bangla. So huge amount of comments and things are coming. So people knew what is there. Whether you like or not, you cannot do it inside a interest group. So their pressure, there is a political pressure from the people rather than the money people. So
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You're the only panelist left here, and I profusely would like to thank you. And of course, our keynote speakers who made such valuable points and contextualize this entire conversation. I would now like to hand it over to Bilal to, say the final words. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Salam, for brilliantly moderating the session. And of course, big thank you to Dr. Nausheen, Ms. Vora, and Mr. Neaz for a very perceptive and thoughtful discussion. I'm sure the YSAN fellows and the broader audience, they have lots of stuff on their mind that they would like to continue discussing with you in future, and we'll make sure that this connection that has been made here digitally will be continued on through next platforms as well. So ladies and gentlemen, we'll now take a 5 minutes health break, and the next session will consist of YSAN fellows presentations, and it will be moderated by my colleague, Mr. Deepak Dhawan, Program Manager, HSF India.
Urban infrastructure related bodies. So it always became a blame game, who will do what. So that is a big problem to solve all those issues. And of course, there's a lack of public awareness, impact of, flooding, what can be the impact and how they can, people can make their behavior to stop littering and dumping wastage on the drainage channels that can be improved as well. So thank you for giving me the opportunity, and I look forward to work with the YSAN network to make sure Dhaka and all the cities around South Asia are improved. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arif, for adding to what our speaker, Mr. Rahman, had shared their insights from Bangladesh. Thank you so much. And now we have next in line, Mr. Achala Arunalu, who is the co-founder of Reforest Sri Lanka, which is an environmental organization, and of Citizens Collective. It's a civil rights nonprofit, and he has formerly worked as a founder of software and IoT technology company. But yes, now I would like to give stage to him to present his case study. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deepak, for the introduction. I will share my screen now. Hope I'm audible and you can see my screen.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I've been working as a volunteer in environmental and civil rights issues from 2015. So being from a technology background and always working with the government who is very less technologically enabled. I mean, their e-government systems are really bad. So I was really happy to hear a few of the keynote speakers mentioning this as a problem, and they're trying to create more transparency by sharing information on websites. And also to see in Dhaka how they are involving the public by sharing project updates through social media channels, and these are really progressive things to hear. So I'll start my presentation quickly. I don't think we have a lot of time. So in Sri Lanka, the local government is the third most powerful body. Like there's the national government, then the provincial governments, provincial councils, and then there are the local governments. So there are over 300 local authorities in such a small country, which is a problem, right? Because our population is just 22 million, and that is less than some of your cities like Dhaka, Karachi, who have more people than our entire country. And so we are a very highly colonized country across the region. I mean, our population density is spread out all through the country. Only about 20 to 25% of the country is left as wild areas. So this is a very bad practice, and it brings up a lot of problems because there's a lot of development everywhere, which is usually not managed well because there's not much information systems or GIS systems to look at everything in a holistic way. There are a lot of information silos, which Shuchi also mentioned, which is there in her country. So if you look at the topic of heat and water, there are a few organizations which are supposed to look after these issues. That's the Ministry of Public Administration, Urban Development and Housing Ministry, Irrigation Ministry, and even the Ministry of Environment. And there's something which was brought about 10, 12 years ago called the Disaster Management Center, because Sri Lanka is also highly vulnerable to climate change, like the rest of us all. So when you talk about urban heat in Sri Lanka, there's a lot of, so we are also part of the monsoon cycles, right? So Arif was mentioning that they also start to have these issues during May and June. So likewise in Sri Lanka, also we get our first monsoon for the year in May and June, because we get it from the Bay of Bengal. So we have like 100 millimeters to 300 millimeters of rainfall coming down in 24 hours, 48 hours, which usually ends up introducing a flood in those times. And when it is like the dry spell, like in April, the soil is very dry, and since it can't carry a lot of moisture, the soil is going to degrade. So this cycle of heat and a lot of rain are very interdependent, and it also damages the soil, which damages our agriculture sector, where about 14% of our population is still engaged in. And also because of the heat, a lot of energy is wasted on air conditioning, because there's less forest cover. There's a lot of heat. Actually, our country is, I think, much cooler than perhaps Deepak is India, because our, like, even today, our heat is like 30 degrees, 32 degrees, right? We are not reaching the 40 degrees yet, but there are few areas which that can be realistic. But still in the capital, Colombo, a lot of energy is going into air conditioning. And since our base power is from coal and diesel, which is imported, this is a huge economic hit. And as a country which has gone through an economic crisis, which is going through one, this is a big problem for us. So if you look at this heat island diagram or a satellite image, you can see from the left from how the years have seen a progress of the temperature increase in our key capital city, Colombo. So earlier it is very less red, but in a few years, in 2017, you can see how much the heat island effect has impacted the capital area. And you can see there's a few circle, how the heat is always there near the power plants. So because there's a lot of emissions there. So one of the mitigation activities we do, I'm, as I said, a part of an environmental organization. So we work with the local authority, especially here in the pictures. This is in Colombo. We work around the country. So we work with the Colombo Municipal Council, which is a local government authority as well in the same sphere. So where we are planting some very taller trees, because having shade and also clearing the dust and other pollutants from there reduces the impact of heat. And also when there's shade, the thermal emissions from the the black tarred road is going to be reduced. I've seen in some countries they are trying to paint the roads white or have white tar, but I don't know how that is going on, but it's not done in Sri Lanka. So, and also we have, this is actually a large urban park called the Vihara Mahadevi Park. So here also we planted over 1,000 trees during the past few years. So this is about not even 100 acres. So it's not enough for the capital city. Our capital city, the Colombo region, is about 37 square kilometers. So it's a large area. And daily there's about commuting of about 5 million people for work. But after the COVID disasters and the recent events, there's less people there. My data is from before 2020. And also, if you look at the urban heat mitigation, other main things to look at green buildings. So right now, the government buildings have to be certified as green buildings. They look at the energy, they look at ventilation, they try to have more green roofs. So the parliament is an old construction, but it was done very well so that it tries to reduce the energy footprint and the heating problems. You can see there's a water body around it that is also a wetland, which is going to absorb some heat and cool the entire environment. On the top right, you can see an image of a recent high-rise building where they have trees coming out of the 40th floor walls as well. So the market, the upper classes or the upper middle and the higher elite classes are looking to purchase these buildings because they are environmentally sensitive, right? And also you can see a university which has green roofs. It's Southeast Asia's or South Asia's first green university. So it's also close to Colombo. So the government under the Urban Development Authority looks at heat mitigation during the construction process, how the materials are used and how the energy is used. But the problem is corruption. I think it is rampant in our region. So if there's corruption, these things won't be implemented very well, right? There's always a shortcut. So even one of the ministries have provided sustainable material guidelines also, compressed stabilized blocks, bamboo, Dura boards, which is made from dried and prepared paddy items, and also mud bricks. But the problem is these are not really used widely yet. So it needs more adoption. And also the watershed. So you can see in Sri Lanka, the northern area, which is close to India, has over 30,000 ancient network of ponds and lakes. So these help to cool the air coming from India, because we get a lot of impact from India's heat problems to Sri Lanka. Even when there's a lot of agricultural work going on and they put fire to the Indian fields, we get the smoke even to Colombo. I've seen it, right? So we are very close by. So we need these tanks in the top region of the country to reduce the climate, the heat in Colombo even, right? And the right image, you can see a watershed. So urban flooding. So so you can see on the right how so Sri Lanka has a very tropical climate. We have over 103 rivers which flow out to the ocean from the central higher part of the country, right? So think of Sri Lanka like this. So we have a lot of streams flowing around. So a few of them cut through Colombo. And because of the developments, the mismanaged agricultural developments, there's a lot of waterlogging. And also there are expressways which have been recently built. They also cut across natural flow outs of water. So they also bring up a lot of flooding issues. So here you can see even the previously shown Parliament building was sometimes having flood issues because there's so much water when there are some monsoons. But this year there was no problem yet to this area, but some areas were inundated. So in 2020, over 500,000 people, or about 10 to 20% of the population was affected by floods, and 87% of the people were living in flood-prone areas. Total damages about USD 27 million in 2020, and over 16,000 houses were affected by monsoon floods. So given Sri Lanka's size, this is a significant impact. So if you look at the data from this is from World Bank, right? United Nations. You can see even in 2020 on the top, on the rightmost side, more than half of the impacted people from natural disasters was from flood. So flood is a critical issue. The black lines are actually the flood. So throughout from 1980 to 2020, you can see flood has been a very big catastrophe for our people. So when you look at the urban mitigation of floods in Sri Lanka, so the Metro Colombo Urban Development Project, which started around 2010, I believe, and it's still going on, but they have gone through changes of what is marketed. So World Bank funded and government funded, they have looked at increasing the sizes of canals, redoing them, cleaning them, having more rain channels, like proper drainage systems, re-establishing the wetlands around country. So the wetlands are sponges which absorb a lot of water during heavy rainfall, and they are critical to mitigating floods. I think Arif also mentioned they had developed a 300-acre area. So we have a few such areas in Colombo. So these are good things and they are working. So a lot of the previous problems have gone away. So here you can see another project's updates. This is a JICA fund. This is from 2005. You can see how they have implemented better drainage and covers, and also have large tunnels under prone areas. And here you can see another area which was previously in 1998 had a flood, but after the project it was fine. But they also highlight in their project, it is unclear which institution has responsibility for operation and management of the drainage. So even after millions of dollars were implemented, even the project is unsure who is going to take over. This is an old report, but the problem is continuing, right? I think Arif also mentioned there are a lot of cross-cutting agencies. They all want to have a part of the pie, but they are not taking the responsibility for issues. So if you look at the wetlands, there's a lot of wetlands. Muthurajavala Mas, very large, 3,000 hectares. So likewise, there's a lot of wetlands around Colombo, which have been properly developed, but they need to be looked after continually. And encroachment is a big problem. If you look at somewhere like Talangama wetland, I saw the rate of encroachment per year is like 1.5%, right? So in like 20-30 years, 40-50% of the wetland might be gone. So these are big problems. I think one of the keynote speakers shared how people are trying to protect these areas in India. So and also my favorite option, urban flood mitigation, protecting the embankments by adding fast-growing, strong-rooted trees. So they will protect the banks from collapsing and inducing floods and in other areas above the issue area. And also here on the center, we are planting along the expressways, because there's a lot of open areas that are also, so these are in the heavily rainy areas. So the trees will help. And also we protect the mountain slopes, because if there's open ground, a lot of rainwater will quickly go down the hill and it will collect, inundating the rivers or streams. So when you have trees and the root systems, the water will be held better. And also, of course, we always need to work on civil activism, because without civil rights being upheld, the politicians in our region, I think, especially in my country, are too corrupt to do their jobs without citizens going and ensuring they do their job after the vote. And also the main problem, I think this was identified throughout in a few countries, information silos. So I have started to implement an open source environmental management system. I hope to inform every one of you about this system later when we are ready to launch. Thank you for the opportunity. I'll expect a few questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Achala, for the great presentation and these wonderful pictures. Although we didn't have a speaker from Sri Lanka today, but I think you fulfilled his absence, and yeah, and you give a good picture of the situation of urban flooding and heat in Sri Lanka. Thanks a lot. So without any delay, I would like to invite our next presenters, Ms. Mavra Bari and Ms. Ayesha Majid. So Mavra is a communication and M&E expert at the United Nations Industrial Development Organization in Pakistan. And Ayesha is the program coordinator at Institute of Urbanism. And today they are presenting on urban flooding in Pakistan, the human face and mitigation strategies. So yeah, please, Mavra, go ahead.
Sure, I should share my screen, right? Just 1 second.
If you want, I can also share it from my side.
No, I think I'd rather share because then I can control, you know, the.
Sure, please.
No, let me know when you can see my screen.
Yeah, we can see. Can you please turn on the presentation mode?
Sure, hold on. Oh, sorry. I just tried to turn on. What's happening?
It's right on the top. This slideshow.
Okay, okay.
Thank you.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you, Deepak, for that introduction. Very happy to be presenting with Ayesha today on urban flooding in Pakistan, showing the human face and mitigation strategies. So basically, just to give you an overview, the way we have structured this presentation is that I will be going through a case study in urban flooding in Karachi that I did last year. Kind of showing the human face, because as we know, we see a lot of the statistics with urban flooding in all of our countries, but we don't really hear the more nuanced stories. So I would be sharing that, and then Ayesha will be delving deep into the mitigation strategies and solutions to urban flooding, taking Islamabad as a case study. So to showcase the different kind of impacts of urban flooding, I wrote this article for this publication on the displacement and generational loss in flooded Karachi, which basically explored how it's not just a climate change issue, but it's actually an urban planning issue. So my protagonist was Rashad Mahmood, who's 59, and he's a journalist, since 30 years. And, as a fellow journalist, I can see the irony when you actually become part of the story and the statistics, right? That, that we are often reporting on. So as we know that Karachi almost on a yearly or by a yearly basis is always falling victim to urban flooding. And unlike a lot of the flooding that we saw in Pakistan earlier in 2022, when it's Karachi's urban flooding, actually it's sometimes the more posh, the more well-to-do sectors that are also really impacted, which is why that I feel like that the news and the media is also reporting it a bit more. So I did think that it's interesting, though, to highlight this, because I think, as we know, like Pakistan is very vulnerable, and then the poorest and the marginalized are more vulnerable. But this goes to show that even people who are, who are middle to upper middle class, even they are being affected. So Rashad's family home is actually located in one of the oldest and most poshest localities in Karachi. So that area is actually called PEX, Pakistan Employees Cooperative Housing Society. PEX has, been going through these urban floodings for over a decade now. And also another interesting thing that I thought about the spatiality, and when you think of the demographics of this kind of flooding, is that, as we know, this Pakistan pre-partition and post-partition is very different. So a lot of the Muhajir community, which is called the immigrant community, who migrated from India to Pakistan, a lot of them actually settled in Karachi. And in Karachi, there has been lots of violence in the past as well, because a lot of political interests tried to kind of pit different kind of, ethnicities, localities against each other, which I'll be talking about how actually politicians and planners actually use that kind of friction to actually not really do anything about urban planning in Karachi. But just to give you a bit of an overview about Rashad's parents, so when they migrated, his father served in the army and mother was an Urdu teacher, obviously public salaries. So, they had to work quite hard to build this house for themselves in 1972. And they have all been living there since then. So just kind of a before and after. So this is Rashad's garden before the floods would hit like a long time ago. And, he shared that his father was very, very, very passionate about gardening, and he made sure that, half of the house was garden, half of it was, the house. As you can see on the picture on the right, it's all of these really old trees, the mulberry tree, the coconut tree, they've been destroyed by these floods every year. And then also you can see that, during the floodings, everything, this is also monetary loss, but also intergenerational loss, because a lot of these appliances or photo albums, books have been passed down through generations. And of course, these things have been destroyed. So this kind of intergenerational loss, which is, of course, some of it is very tangible, like, the books, the garden, but then some things like photo albums you can never get back, right? Also, other things they've lost, is like degrees and birth certificates, which is, of course, it's a pain to get these things, but they have, but it's still, it's an inconvenience, but still, they can recoup those losses. So I think for this family, it's just very hard to see that, all of these things that were passed down from their generation have been lost. So, as they said, 1,000 books were actually lost that, his mother passed down to their family library. But one thing that I thought while writing this article and doing the research is that a lot of the times the way we talk about youth and climate change is talking about the future and the loss that our future generations will be not being able to inhabit a livable planet. But it's also, I think we really think about the history that is lost through climate change. So this is why I wanted to kind of talk about this kind of loss as well. Again, this is Rashad's. He has twin daughters. They were 12 at the time I did the interview. They're 13 now. And as you can see, the room is destroyed. And Rashad was sharing that, his daughters, in the beginning when the floods would happen, they would kind of think it was like fun because they were so young. But now he shared that, they're developing this very real phobia of the rain and flooding. And, that's why they have decided to actually move from this house that, has been this generational house for them. So that is more the personal story, but I also want to highlight the systemic and the structural, the political, social implications of urban flooding as well. So as we know that it's just not, it's not about, increased rainfall. It's also about, especially in Karachi, about the lack of urban planning. And it's like a neglectful system because even though Karachi population has exponentially risen and the spatiality of the city has changed so much, but the sewage systems, they are still, they have not been updated to the way they should be. So also according to Arshad, you can at least see in this quote that mitigating flood risks are connected to the development improvement of urban drainage infrastructure. Karachi's storm water channels are into two major water bodies, the Liari River and the Malir River. So instead of strengthening the drainage in the city with increasing populations, the drains are covered with more and more projects, further choking the drainage. So that's one reason why the floods happen, because when it rains excessively, there's no proper drainage system. Also in my research, I was very shocked to hear that in a city of 27.5 million people, biggest city in one of the biggest cities in South Asia, biggest city in Islamabad, that Karachi only has 2 landfills. which is obviously not enough. And then another thing that came up was that due to the long distances and lack of time and monetary resources, often the solid waste does not reach the destined landfills and ends up on streets and drainage openings, causing even more hazardous choking of the sewage system. So I'm sure, we all must have seen lots of, news footage of seeing, these city roads choked with sewage and, like garbage and water. So I shall be talking more about the solutions, but just to quickly just give you an overview, one thing that the kind of the chicken and egg problem, or, it's not so simple, is that we could increase the number of landfills at regular intervals. So it's, given it has places to go and it's not getting like stuck in one place in the city. But however, even with landfills in Pakistan, because they are not scientifically made, and there's not proper segregation of waste, they're actually not the most sustainable solution either. Achala was speaking to this as well. And again, corruption, conflict, and as I was mentioning before, these kind of sectarian kind of violence, all of these things are also being leveraged by the political elite to kind of deflect, accountability. So one way that from Rashad's case study that I saw was that there's a lot of squatter colonies, what we call kachi abadis, in these cities where these kinds of more posh localities are right next to these, illegal or like squatter colonies as well. And more than 60% of Karachi's population actually lives in informal settlements. And it's actually mushrooming at an exponential rate, especially with, climate refugees from other countries as well. So basically, in Rashad's own campaigning, he was told by the city municipality that, if he did not stop campaigning for changes and better like a drainage and sewage system, that he might incite a violence between the Mahajir community, which is the immigrant community, and the Pathan community, which is, immigrants from mostly northwestern Pakistan. And, this kind of like the government is actually municipality is actually trying to keep the friction going so they can kind of put it on them, on the community, rather than taking responsibility. Lastly, this is just, I found very interesting in my research that, another thing we don't think about when we think about maybe climate change or mitigation is the beliefs people hold, or when people don't have any faith, much faith in the municipality for change, that they look to more spiritual other things. So there's a myth of the savior saint. So basically, Abdullah Shah Ghazi was a late Sufi saint, and his shrine was built 10 centuries ago. And the myth goes that he protects the city from cyclones. So Rashad per se does not really believe in these things, but he did tell me that how much, the people from all across the strata do come to the shrine, praying for others, for different kinds of things. But there is this kind of like mythical, this very interesting, strong belief in the saint and his power. And then I also went to the shrine myself, and it was very interesting to see, that kind of spirituality connected with this kind of climate change issue. And basically, I think I'll go to the next slide then. Yeah, but it's also that this protective eye of Abdullah Shah Ghazi residents are getting increasingly worried still, though, that because they feel like it's not enough for obviously to be saved from these kind of climate catastrophes, and people are putting more pressure. But to give you an idea how much this saint is revered, like someone from the, this person from the member of the Sindh assembly, Sindh is part, Karachi is where, Karachi is located in the province of Sindh, that Agha Siraj Durrani actually went on the record saying that Saint Abdullah Shah Ghazi has saved us many times before, and he will save us this time as well. So you can see how the political, again, is like kind of like shifting the responsibility not to themselves but to other forces, be it political, social, or mythical. So basically that is pretty much all I wanted to go through, except one thing I found very sad. Sorry to leave on a sad note, but one thing Rashad said that my family, I'm leaving my family home because of climate change, but I fear that my children will have to leave Karachi or the country because of climate change. So I felt like that was a very powerful kind of note that he shared. And this is their living room when it was not, flooded. So we can all see the difference, And just now, Ayesha will be continuing the presentation and kind of taking now Islamabad, which is the federal capital, as a case study. And maybe she's talking about the solutions. So I think from my very depressing ending note, she will take you through a little bit more positive note. So thank you, everyone, and over to you, Ayesha.
Thank you so much, Mavra. Mavra, can you help me with the slides though, because I can't share my screen?
Sure.
Sure. Okay, so can you move on to the next one, please? Yeah, okay. So, like Karachi, Islamabad has been facing a number of climate-induced water crises in the recent years. Due to higher average temperatures and altered rainfall patterns, every year the city oscillates between extreme water shortage and then seasonal flash floods within a span of few months. The water-related challenges in this city are actually being intensified by the rapid urbanization and the inability of the governance, the structures to actually keep pace with the growing population. Islamabad is a city which is blessed with natural waterways, which we call nalas in the local language. And the nalas, they basically channelize water without causing flooding. However, encroachment on these nalas, along with a rising waste management issue in the city, which basically has made these nalas a dumping site for solid waste. That is reducing their water carrying capacity, especially during the rainy seasons. And this leads to overflowing of the water in these nalas and then causes flooding. Moreover, the expansion of concrete dominated surfaces in the city has decreased urban permeability, which leads to increased runoff and then leads to floods as well. In 2021, heavy floods caused urban flooding in E11 residential sector of the city. But to ensure that such an incident doesn't occur again, the Pakistan Environment Protection Agency and the Capital Development Authority, they proactively cleaned all the nalas before the monsoon season in 2022. Moreover, CDA and Pakistan Council for Research and Water Resources initiated a project to construct surface rainwater harvesting setup in the city to prevent flooding during the rainy seasons, and also to utilize that harvested water in the drier seasons. The project is also initiated to artificially improve the water table in the city, which has been deteriorating by 1.7 meters annually due to excessive groundwater pumping. CDA has also made it mandatory for all the new buildings to have rooftop rainwater harvesting setups so that the volume of water running onto the streets decreases. However, the progress on it remains slow. Can you move on to the next one, please? Can you move on to the next slide? Yeah, this one. Okay, so since June 2022, more than 70 underground recharge wells have been constructed, although 8 to 9 of them have failed, but the rest are actually working. The CDA aims to construct it up to 100 wells before the 2023 monsoon season hits. The wells that have been constructed have recharged around 8 to 10 million gallons of water since 2022. And the largest well that has been constructed in the Kachnar Park region has recharged 1.9 million gallons of rainwater. Had it not been constructed, this 1.9 million gallon of water would have entered the Nalalai, which would then have flooded the twin cities of Islamabad and Rawalpindi. And Nalalai is one of the reasons that Islamabad and Pindi both get flooded. So this was a huge success. Moreover, it was observed that the areas that where the wells were constructed, heavy rains did not cause flooding, and the water table also improved. PCR, WR, and CD are regularly monitoring the water table, and it was reported that the water table has improved. However, the areas where they did not have such wells, so they did experience flooding even in 2022. While constructing these wells is not the only solution to prevent urban flooding. It is a step in the right direction because it will contribute to the integrated watershed management that can ensure sustainable water management. So can you move on to the next slide? Okay, so there are two kinds of surface runoff recharge wells that are being constructed in Islamabad. One are the larger ones, which where there is an artificial pond with an inverted injection wells. These areas basically have a large catchment area, and the one that is in Kachnar Park is that one. Whereas soaking pits are being made in places that have small catchment areas. Both of these techniques basically break the water's velocity by channelizing it into areas where then it can then be recharged into the underground aquifer. So can you please move on to the next one? Next slide. Okay. So while constructing artificial wells for surface runoff, there are a few things that need to be considered. You can find the details of the manual that is prepared by PCRWR that I'll share in the chat in a little bit. But just to go over some of them. So for example, the selection site is very important. The site should have an area where water can accumulate. Then the size of the catchment area determines which kind of setup should be installed. For example, for larger areas, you can have ponds along with inverted injection wells. And then for smaller catchment areas, you can have soaking pits. You'll find all these details in the manual that I'll share in a bit. It is also important to know the depth of the water table in the area. So if it is too low, the injection well might not work. And if it's not too low and if the water table is high, then you need to have cemented storage tanks so that it doesn't lead to the issue of seepage in the nearby buildings. It is also important to know the rainfall patterns so that you can have an appropriate capacity for the well that you're designing. Moreover, while the rooftop harvested rainfall might not require extensive filtration, the surface runoff does because it gets mixed up with solid waste and other chemicals, for example, diesel, petrol, etc. on the road. So the ponding area should have proper filtration so that it doesn't contaminate the groundwater, underground water. So can you move on to the next slide, please? Okay, so this model can be adopted in a lot of different cities with slight modifications to meet the local circumstances. So, for example, the area near Baqi Jinnah in Lahore used to get flooded quite easily when it would rain, but the water table in the area wasn't too low. So what they did was that they built a cemented underground water storage tank of 1.4 million gallon capacity, and since then, the issue of urban flooding in that area has been, it has been prevented to quite a large extent. The stored water is then utilized to actually water the grounds in Baqi Jinnah, and a similar setup is being installed at Al Hamra Arts Council as well, and that is also an area which used to get flooded quite easily. This is a solution. The cemented underground storage tanks is a solution that can be adopted in Karachi because Karachi has a topography that does not allow for the kind of wells that are being installed in Islamabad. However, with slight modifications, this model can be utilized in Karachi as well. And with that, I would like to end my presentation and hand it over to Deepak. So thank you.
Thank you, Mavra and Ayesha. Mavra, can you please remove the presentation? Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, thanks a lot, Mavra, for adding this human touch to our discussion today by sharing these personal stories. I definitely agree with you as at the heart of the urban governance. The people who live in and work in these cities are the most effective by the decisions we make, and their voices and experience are often overlooked. So yeah, this helps us understand the impact of urban governance on people's life and yeah, highlight the importance of working collectively with the communities to find solutions to the common challenges. So now, without any delay, our final presentation of the day, I would like to now invite Debarshi Das Gupta. He is the Senior Research Associate at CPR, Center for Policy Research. Yeah, please, Dave.
I'm not sure anybody has the bandwidth to process more presentations or not. So I'll just be quick. Hello, am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible. Please go ahead.
Okay. So I don't want to sort of give a kind of a very detailed presentation, but rather I would prefer summing it up of what we learned. So my presentation generally talks about what is a rhetoric, like what we talk about so much of the things, and as the keynote speaker sort of mentioned, and what are the praxis, that is what is practiced on ground. So I think these two are very interesting images that I find. That one is speaking about the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, that are sort of the new fancy reports who talks about getting ready to get adapted for climate change events such as urban flooding. But on the reality, if we see at the cities, they aren't ready for normal rain, forget freak events. So I think that's the kind of a reality we are facing in South Asia. We have a lot of solutions, we have a lot of reports, but I think we are still in a very delusional space, the state of being perplexed, I rather call it. So I think a typical thing for India, I think as a city that they have faced in many cases has been the globalization's impact on cities. Like I think many of you would sort of be knowing this Bangalore and Hyderabad is kind of the new IT, they call it the Silicon Valley, they call it. And due to this influx of the globalization, there had been a lot of environmental hazard at the very local scale. And that has sort of had a very dual kind of effect that on one hand, the globalization has sort of the urbanization from the globalization has led to local environmental hazard, but at the same time, this hazard has actually proved to be detrimental in actually making progress towards further sort of foreign investment. So it's a kind of a very dichotomous situation, I would say, where like one thing leads to another. But what more important is, like we talk about many solutions. I think Shuchi talk about systemic thinking, someone else talk about intersectionality. But I think like we have to understand the perspective of it's really not always very, I mean, even if it's a practice, but I think it's still very kind of diffused and kind of here and there rather than a kind of a very system, like an organized way to do this. So for example, we all know this kind of resilient cities and blue-green infrastructure and all these things are kind of highly sort of pushed by many of the multilaterals and other organizations. But at the same time, if you look at the cities, I think what it is often termed messy and hidden, and we still haven't been able to, I would say, digest the entirety of it. Like if you see all these interventions, these are still, I think Mr. I'm forgetting the name, I'm sorry, but the panelist from Bangladesh, I think he spoke about this, like we are very contextually wrong, like what we are being taught and what we practice is kind of very different. So even if we see this kind of flood intervention like that are being promoted, it still remains a very European phenomenon. They still kind of restrict to very kind of certain specific cases. But if you look at the reality, there is a lot of conflict and that needs a much more nuanced engagement on multiple fronts. So same with Indian context and most importantly, the South Asian context where there are very structural issues, poverty, vulnerability that are very deeply entrenched in the social and political fabric. And until we sort of address them, we sort of can't talk about flood as a whole. So the last two slides is kind of what are the emerging problems. Like even if you bring the climate change debate, you see there is a kind of a current exposure that, and there is a kind of a future exposure. So I'll just go back to my first slide, where in one side, we are not even sort of equipped to, I would say, address the current exposure. How fit are we to sort of address the future exposure? So I think we need a lot of more robust and adaptive institution and political system, but how we're still not very sure, I would say. So these are the kind of question I actually wanted to put it in front of the panelists, because I thought it would be really interesting to engage with this question rather than sort of, I mean, putting my view in, like, what is system thinking, like Shuchi mentioned, like, and how we can sort of incorporate it. We all know there is a lack of interagency coordination, but how can this be enhanced? Like how local government embedded in the broader political framework turn this into practice, as simple as that. So I'll just take one more minute to sort of just highlight a case on the Surat. So like if Karachi has learned from Ahmedabad heat action plan, I think Surat is a city that is south of Ahmedabad, and in 2006 it kind of had a very it's a coast it's on the bank of the river Tapi, and in 2006 it sort of suffered a very high flood. And sort of that prompted the local municipal corporation, SMC, Surat Municipal Corporation, to address some of the structural issues. So there was this program called 100 Resilient Cities, funded by the Rockefeller Foundation, that tapped into multiple network and expertise, and finally they came up with Surat Resiliency Strategy. But I'm not talking about the verbatim of it, resilience strategy, but what I wanted to mention is they did something, and that kind of actually addressed some of these structural issues like health, climate change, river management, and all these things sort of interlinks. They kind of addressed it, and they had a very proactive local leadership that actually made effort to tap into various networks. They did this with both structural and non-structural measures. And what the most important point that I find is whatever they did an institutionalization of all the measures so that that can be sustained over a long period of time. I'll end it with here. Thank you, everyone.